The savage lives for himself. Civilized man always lives for others, lives externally, right?
When you have developed that specific self-trust, then you will be capable of being alone with yourself.
Capitalism itself became what is called woke capital.
It is an illusion Marx has introduced. He believes the working class has one interest. That is strange and misleading because interests are culturally defined. People who are experiencing that they count as nothing in a society. That is a specific type of social suffering, I think. And it is a hard one.
Are we in some kind of end of history?
You're almost at the end.
This is a very special interview for me. My guest Axel Honneth is not just one of the greatest philosophers alive, but one of my first teachers who made me fall in love with philosophy. Back in college, my biggest struggle was dealing with my own craving for external validation. I found myself racking up achievements I didn't need, to pursue careers I didn't want, all in order to impress people I didn't particularly like. And when I realized this as a 19, 20-year-old, I decided that I needed to be free from external validation altogether in order to build a healthy self-esteem. So I went the opposite extreme. I deleted all of my social media. I moved to Nepal to practice in a Tibetan monastery. I was genuinely considering renouncing the world. But then I encountered, among others, Axel's work on Hegel, and it showed me that I'd set up a false dichotomy. The way to build a healthy self-esteem, it turns out, is not by rejecting validation altogether, it is by gaining the right kind of external validation. The key question then is not how do I stop caring, it's how, from whom, and when should I care. This is the most important lesson that Axel taught me and will also teach you today. But what really moved me back then, even more than Axel's ideas into philosophy, is who he is as a person. As one of the most important and busy scholars, he spent hours every month taking me, some random undergrad at the time, one-on-one carefully through his works. His generosity showed me what a philosophical life was all about. This interview is special then because it gave me the opportunity almost a decade later to revisit the works that started my journey into philosophy. In this interview, we're going to tease out the relevance of Axel's ideas by examining a common tension within the modern left between class conflict and identity politics, before providing you with a systematic roadmap for how to live a life not just for others, but authentically your own. Without further ado, my teacher, Axel Honneth. I want to begin by critiquing, examining one of your most interesting and controversial opinions. In classical leftist progressive movements, it has been a politics of sameness, class conflict. Workers of the world unite to fight against what many people see is the major injustice and inequality, namely the material one. In the recent decades, there's been a rise of identity politics, and that has been interpreted as a politics of difference. Not only do we need to care for African Americans, but African American women, but disabled African American women. And so it becomes intersectionality. It's a kind of a force of difference. Most scholars seem to think that recognition and redistribution are opposed or at least distinct. But your opinion is that all forms of moral struggle are actually at the bottom struggles of recognition.
Yes.
Why is that?
Exactly. Let me first say that I never liked the opposition between identity politics and social politics, however you want to call it, because I started from trying to make clear to me what workers were fighting for. And I found immediately that it was completely wrong to say they were mainly fighting for their material interests. So if you go into the literature, historical literature, you easily find out that one central element of their struggles is to fight for their own esteem, to fight for being esteemed as workers and being fairly paid. So you see already in that sentence how fair payment and the fight for recognition are hanging together, yeah? So you can't decouple the fight for recognition, to count as someone in the eyes of others, completely from material concerns. Because the esteem you receive is only verified by certain material consequences. These material consequences can be of very different kind. One sort of, let's say, the material backing of recognition is payment. Yeah, but it's only one. So you can have, for example, think of all the debates we have about slavery now. How shall we recompensate slavery? First step is we have to recognize that slavery was a crime. And then probably to make that symbolic recognition more verifiable, more believable, you have to back it with material redistribution. Yeah?
Right.
So in that sense, I think one shouldn't oppose recognition on the one side and material questions, distributional questions on the other.
Right. But I think the debate, and you had a wonderful debate book with Nancy Fraser, isn't about whether material interests have some kind of recognitive esteem overlay to them, but whether everything can be reduced to recognition, right? Is there not a surplus of material interest in addition to the recognition? For the example, let's take the classical Marxist case of the coal miner.
Right,
Okay,
right,
so certainly he is saying, you're not paying me fairly compared to the coal owner, but he's also saying, I'm dying out here, right?
Yeah.
And that is distinctly different from recognition. No, so there's a surplus beyond recognition, right?
I would love to agree to that.
Okay,
I
but you
have
don't. Okay.
I still have a certain tendency to reject that claim because, look, I mean, sure, it's a question of survival. Yeah, if they don't get paid fairly, they might not be able to survive. Right. But the way they are experiencing their own dying is not simply formulated in physical terms. Right. It is an attack on their dignity, that they have to die when and under the condition that they are doing hard work for the community. So I think already their experience is somewhat framed by moral vocabularies. And I think the best way to spell out the moral vocabulary they are using in understanding their own experiences is in terms of recognition.
Right, but let me give you a thought experiment, okay? Let's take the example of an artist who is, they're not starving, so they don't have to die. They have a lot of recognition from the community, but they're not paid well, because art doesn't pay well. And let's compare that with, let's say, a plumber, okay? Plumbers in America get paid quite well. Some of them make, above six figures.
Right.
But they have very little recognition. In a party, you want to say, I'm an artist. You don't want to tell people, I'm a plumber. And so, to me, even when you look at these occupations, there's a distinct difference between what the material a society confers and the recognition. So how do you think about that?
No, first I think about it again in terms of distribution of recognition. Distribution might not be the correct word, but it's first a question of or on how a society is paying attention and esteeming certain of its necessary or unnecessary professions and occupations. So that's at the bottom of it, yeah? And there are permanently struggle on that. I mean, this hierarchy of reputations of certain occupations are changing over time. And for example, I mean, to give you a short example from 10 to 12 or 20 years ago, suddenly bankers in Germany lost reputation. It was because of the financial crisis. Everyone thought of them as being not serious, not sincere, and not doing what they are supposed to do, namely to do fair banking
for society.
business.
Right,
yeah.
Right.
So that was a political reaction based on moral appreciations or moral evaluations that suddenly changed something in the reputational system. And so the question comes back again to the point I mentioned earlier, whether our esteem or recognition for certain occupations is in congruent relationship to payment. And there is a lot of unfairness in our society, heavily. We both know how depending our societies are on nurses. Nurses are extremely bad paid. They are not even now, after COVID, they are not more highly esteemed than before. Even when society went through a period where everyone was applauding to nurses because they were doing their job in the hardest time. But it didn't change a lot in the reputational system, and especially not in the payment system. So I think this is always a political struggle on how a society, a community, a political community is respecting, esteeming certain of its most necessary businesses, occupations, and whether that is in agreement with the payment system.
Right. So your response to my thought experiment of the artist is saying they are getting one species of recognition, which is, it sounds cool in a dinner party.
Right.
But the payment system does not actually align with the societal recognition. But the payment system is also another source of recognition. We must understand that.
Yeah.
Also not in material terms, but recognitive terms, right?
Right.
So let me read to you a quote from one of your early masterworks, Struggle for Recognition. The models of conflict that start from collective interests are to obtain or enlarge control over certain opportunities for their reproduction. By contrast, the models of conflicts that start from collective feelings of having been unjustly treated are those that track back to moral experiences of social groups who face having legal or social recognition withheld from them. You're drawing out, struggles over interest, over recognition. It is important to stress, however, that this second model of conflict, recognition, based on a theory of recognition, should not try to replace the first utilitarian model, but only extend it. The young Honneth, it sounded like you were willing to entertain both analysis of social struggle on both of these ontological frameworks. What changed?
First, that I don't understand the sentence any longer, because I don't know exactly what it means to extend it. Right. Yeah, I mean, I'm obviously claiming that the model of the struggle for recognition is meant to extend the earlier model of conflict over interests. I wouldn't speak of extension. I was thinking of it when I was writing the book. I was thinking of it as reframing it or reformulating it and making something visible that wasn't so visible before. And that was another point. The idea that there are clearly definable interests is in most of the cases extremely misleading. I think it is an illusion Marx has introduced. Yeah, he believes the working class has one interest, and the interest is in overcoming capitalist relations of production, and the interest is finally directed at the revolution. And I think that is strange and misleading because interests are culturally defined. Yeah, it makes a huge difference whether you as a worker coming from a Catholic background, from an Islamic background, or a Buddhist background, or Protestant background. That shapes how you understand your own interests. And so that was one point I wanted to make. And the other point I wanted to make is that interests, if we study them, the best way to understand interest is to see how they are related to expectations of being respected, esteemed, valuated, or whatever. So extension is probably the wrong word. I don't want to exclude completely, and I agree to you, completely the raw situation where you have bare interests. I think bare interests appear in cases of threats to life.
Survival.
So the people in Gaza, it would be somewhat strange to believe that they are
Purely struggling for recognition.
Right. I mean, they are also struggling for that because they are experiencing that they are somewhat forgotten by the world public. And so there is an element of that. And I think their experience might even be that they are starving because nobody is respecting them, taking notice of their history of suffering. So I don't know whether you can completely decouple the two,
Right.
but there might be hard cases.
I see. What I've pushed you on so far is purely on the philosophical level, but let's talk about the practical level, because from my point of view, in 2008, there was a big kind of, let's call it socialist or economic struggle latent in the force of the people, Occupy Wall Street.
Right.
In the 2010s, I think a lot of that energy has been, I'm going to use the word co-opted by a lot of what people call identity politics and gender, race. And what's interesting is that capitalism itself became what is called woke capital, right? These companies started having the rainbow in their packaging, started making very progressive kind of advertisements. And this seemed to diffuse the pressure on capitalism itself. So even if there is no philosophical issue, do you think practically this politics of recognition has in some sense thwarted the interest of the working class? Yeah.
No, I don't accept that. And that has, on the one side, to do with the genesis of my own thinking, because I started not from what is called today identity politics. I wasn't so much interested in minorities, cultural, sexual, whatever minorities. I was basically interested, and the literature I'm referring to was the working class. So I wanted to understand the sentiments and the, let's say, the spirits that are inspiring the working class or are besetting the working class. So that was the starting point. Sure, at that time there was already a clear indication that the forces of protest would go over from the working class to other minorities. Yeah, sure. That happened much earlier. That happened in the 1960s probably. And everyone was aware of it. Marcuse was one of the first to realize that subcultures may be in the future become the true forces of revolt and change. That happened because the working class seemed to be integrated into the capitalist system. So everyone was looking, I mean, everyone inside the critical theory tradition was looking for new social movements because they were searching for social movements criticizing and, if possible, attacking capitalism.
I see.
Yeah. So the first movements that came into view were subcultures, hippie subculture. Marcuse was in love with the hippie subculture. Then probably the homosexual subculture. So this interest in what is called today identity politics started much earlier. Yeah. And it started probably with the gay movement, in my view. And then a lot of other social experiences, social happenings added to it. And then suddenly you had in European countries new minorities. For example, religious minorities we never had before. We had a Turkish minority. We had a minority of people from Italy. We had religious minorities, ethnic minorities. So it was a change in the social composition of the population and of the social structure of these highly developed capitalist countries that brought with it a growing interest in those minorities. And so it was a shift from a belief and a hope in the working class as a revolutionary force going over to these minorities. Yeah, and then one had to reconceptualize what are the possible interests these minorities might have. That was the starting point of the whole discussion on multiculturalism. Yeah, multiculturalism that's a debate that is 30, 40 years old. Nothing to do with woke. The idea that this is all woke came much later, I think. So in the beginning, it was a very legitimate undertaking to understand the motives of those minorities that were created by structural changes in the capitalist system. They needed new workforce. They took in workforce from other countries. So they allowed much more immigration out of self-interest, capitalist interests. That allowed immigration. And then suddenly you had a problem with minorities. And then the longer it took, you find out, or we found out, that these minorities are suffering from what? Sometimes underpayment, sometimes not even becoming visible as having other ethnic, religious, I don't know, historical backgrounds than the majority.
Right. So one way to understand what you're saying is like recognition as a moral grammar of social conflicts enables you both to understand what was powerful about the workers' movement, but also read that as in continuity with these new kinds of multicultural movements.
Right.
I hope this introduction has made people realize the importance of the topics we're going to discuss for the rest of this interview. But now I want to go a bit more to the theoretical core of your work and this tripartite division of recognition, love, respect, and esteem. So let's begin with love first. Help us understand what is love and how is it formed or misformed in infancy?
I changed a little my perspective on that, yeah, since the book on the struggle for recognition. In the beginning, I thought one could say that recognition is principally dividable in three different aspects. So I thought basically all people in the world in human history are expecting to be loved as a form of recognition, and I will explain what that means, are expecting to be recognized as a competent legal member of your community, and are expecting to be recognized as a valuable part in the division of labor, esteem. So I think I changed a little bit that perspective because I thought this is more a result of certain historical processes. Yeah, I think we don't have this tripartite system in the beginning of human history. It's a late evolvement, but now we have it. I think with Hegel, that's a Hegelian idea. I think we can justifiably say that there are three forms of recognition in our types of society, modern societies, because we grew up with the expectation to be loved by someone in or with regard to our individual desires, needs, and experiences. That is something very special. You only can get it from concrete others, and the way you can get it is not simply by a certain cognitive attitude, but by an emotional attitude, yeah? So, and I call that love. I wasn't referring only and primarily to sexual love. I was referring much broader to any kind of loving relationship. That can be also friendships, that might be the relationship between a child and a caring person. So that is very basic, I think, for our ability to develop something like self-identity and self-trust.
The most interesting claim you make about love is it's not just a mere good for you, like pain or pleasure or even survival, but you said it's a precondition to cognition or subjectivity itself. And what that makes me think of are feral children. So children we've discovered living in the wild with no recognition growing up. Genie is one of them in the United States, Victor in France. And even after they've lived in civilization, they have trouble using the word you and I, these abstract kind of pronouns, which lends credence to this idea that this kind of love and recognition is needed for self-consciousness.
Right, right.
In your book, you argue that the mechanism is when an infant is born, they kind of think they're omnipotent. And it's only by the infant imitating the mother or their caretaker's recognition of the infant as dependent that the infant learns to see itself as dependent.
Right.
Is that a fair?
Right. It's a very good description of it.
Yeah. And so here's my question, which is, presumably after the infant learns this through recognition, the infant doesn't need to imitate someone every time they try to cognize themselves. They can evaluate themselves rationally. So if that can be done after that is learned, why can't that be the method by which it is learned? Like, why can't the infant in infancy just realize, oh, hey, I'm not that bottle over there, right? Or, yeah.
Yeah. What does it need? It needs a certain, probably pre-reflexive realization of the fact that I'm not alone in the world and I'm a depending being. And I have to accept that dependency. So how can I learn to be dependent on others? Yeah. The child learns, I think, to first that it is a needy being, the needs of which have to be satisfied. And it has to realize that therefore it is depending on something outside. So I'm starting with the premise, a Freudian premise, that the first, always hard to say what words exactly to use, yeah, for that early stage, with the fantasy of omnipotence, as you were saying, fantasizing that it can survive because it's omnipotent by its own. Realizing in the next step that it is depending. I mean, that his or her own needs will not be satisfied if he or she is not crying, and crying in such a way, or asking or shouting, that the mother, whoever the caregiver is appearing and satisfying the needs. So there has to be frustration. My needs are not satisfied. I'm not capable.
Right. I'm not omnipotent.
Yeah,
I'm
exactly.
Not
so frustration and then satisfaction. And the satisfaction is given by a caretaker that then has to be realized as an other person, somebody able to satisfy your needs. And that then leads to the realization first that I'm a needy being, and in my neediness, I'm depending on somebody concrete other. And that then allows a first moment of self-trust. I take that from Winnicott. Yeah? This early self-relationship is therefore trusting that your needs will be satisfied. And that is a basis for this elementary self-trust. And without that, my speculation, we have a hard time to develop a stable ego identity, or however you want to call it.
So for an infant who has had the misfortune of not receiving this kind of love, what does the disrespect or pathology manifest as come adulthood? And is there anything that can be done after the formative years for this to be corrected?
I'm hoping there can be done something. There are different reactions to that. Yeah, either you are permanently fighting for your own needs to become respected, or you feel so uncertain about the value of your own neediness and your own needs that you can't develop any kind of self-trust. So I think the the best way to describe it positively is by, again, using Winnicott, who would say, when you have developed that specific self-trust, then you will be capable of being alone with yourself. And you might say that people who were not, in a stable sense, able to develop such a self-trust might have difficulties, to be alone with yourself, with oneself.
And this, by the way, I think is going to come up again and again, and why I found your work so fascinating as an undergraduate is because independence comes from the right kind of dependence.
Yeah.
Right. And in this case, this is a very primitive form.
Right,
We're to see that in
right.
esteem again and again.
And independence is a form of
correct dependence, right?
Right. Correct. Yeah, exactly.
Correct.
Or the right understanding of your dependency. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. And so we talked about the case where someone who doesn't experience this in their formative years, the possibilities of them to regain it through a loving marriage or something like that. And you said you're hopeful. What about the reverse case? Can something like this be taken away? In your work, you seem to suggest yes. Like if you are tortured, if you are raped, if your basic needs are kind of robbed away from you. How do you think about figures like Epictetus or someone like a modern Stoic like James Stockdale, who was a Vietnam War veteran who was tortured in a prison of war camp, who don't develop those kinds of pathologies or disrespect? So it's not one-to-one with recognition. No. There's other mechanisms, right?
Yeah, sure. It's not meant in a strictly causal sense. First, I wanted to find the right moral vocabulary to describe what harm is done to you when you are tortured, when you are raped. And the moral vocabulary I found had to do with the basic development of self-trust. So what happens when you are tortured or raped, my guess, is it's an attack on your self-trust. It's an attack on you trusting that your basic needs are being of value. That is completely harmed, destroyed. So the traumas after such attacks, like rape or torture, are traumas of self-denial or of complete uncertainty. And I never would claim that this is an automatic result.
It's not deterministic.
No. There are coping mechanisms, there are therapies, there are even ways of self-therapeuting. So I think there are ways out. But it was meant to understand what's going on in such crimes. And what make us think that these crimes have such horrible, as so horrible, yeah? What makes them so horrible?
In one of your more recent books, which we're going to talk about, Freedom's Right, you described a very interesting pathology. I wonder if you'd characterize that as a pathology of self-love, which is that certain professions where you have to feign emotion, like a hostess or a steward. You said that if you did that for too long, you might develop a kind of alienation from your own emotions because you have to feign them to do well.
Right.
Is that a pathology of self-love that you are alienated from your own internal state?
No, I think it is, if I would have to reframe it in those categories, and I take the example from Ali Hochschild, who has written on stewardesses. I think I would describe it as a pathology of esteem, because so you have learned to be the pleasant stewardess. Yeah, you always have to smile.
Right.
You have to do it for hours, long hours. So what's happening after Ali Hochschild is you are internalizing at a certain point these attitudes. You can't get easily rid of them. So you are habitualizing these attitudes. And that then makes you smiling all the time. Yeah, I mean,
Even when you don't feel it.
yeah, exactly. So there is a discrepancy between emotional states and expressions.
Right.
And that is a discrepancy that might be described in terms of a certain pathology. I'm not sure whether I would use the notion pathology, but there is something wrong.
Yeah.
It makes you believe that your social standing and your social reputation is somewhat depending on you smiling, on you showing a specific expression.
Yeah.
And so let's call it it's probably a social pathology in case
Right.
that this is true for a lot of professions. And it might be true for a lot of professions today that people are expected to show a nice face all the time.
Not for philosophers, thankfully.
Yeah, the opposite.
Right.
They have to be.
We have to be grumpy.
Exactly.
The
Very
grumpier we
serious,
are, the more
severe.
seriously they take us.
Exactly.
Yes. Okay, so when you said that, what this made me think about is that famous line in Rousseau's Second Discourse that
Right.
The savage lives for himself. Civilized man always lives for others,
Right.
lives externally, right? But before we go to esteem, we have to examine the second state,
Right.
which is self-respect. So help us understand what self-respect is. What is the self-view? Especially because it already kind of sounds like self-love, right? That you can, you're comfortable with yourself. You kind of respect your own needs.
Right.
How is self-respect different?
I understood respect and self-respect first, I think, in Kantian terms. It is probably a little bit misleading. So I thought respect is the attitude I expect from others in taking me as an autonomous, self-determining person. That is normally expressed in legal terms, namely that you are, by law, recognized as an autonomous person, having the status of a legal person, which means in your legal community you have certain rights and certain obligations. That this consciousness of having rights and obligations makes you sure that you belong to that legal community and that you can expect to be legally respected. So the longer I was searching on that, the more I tended to make a difference between two forms of respect. I'm still a little bit undecided. So there might be moral respect and there might be legal respect. Legal respect comes with rights. Yeah, so at the moment where you have subjective rights, you have a certain testimony of you being recognized as an autonomous person by the legal community. When you are morally respected, that does not need the backing of rights in the positive, in the sense of legal claims, but it comes probably as a certain attitude. So I'm not so sure whether we should make a distinction between two subforms of respect or whether we should reduce it to one. It depends on the very interesting question whether we can speak of a distinction between moral rights and legal rights. And Hegel, I think, has a tendency to be skeptical with regard to moral rights. He would say moral rights do not have any ontological standing. I mean, what does it mean to speak of moral rights when they don't come as legal claims you have? So that's an ongoing debate. And it's not a debate in the outside philosophical world, it's a debate I have with myself.
I see. As are most debates, I imagine, that you have.
Right.
Where I'm still struggling with this kind of recognition is what are the symptoms of disrespect? In the case of self-love, after one is raped or tortured, I understand how it is an attack, even if it doesn't have to change you, it is an attack on this kind of confidence, a basic self-confidence. Yet, when I see all the different kinds of characters in history that didn't live in a state of rights, again, I'll bring up Epictetus, or maybe Frederick Douglass, or maybe a pirate in the Caribbean, right, or maybe a settler in the American frontier, I don't even perceive an attack on them. Like in the way that a torture and rape would be an attack they would need to resist. Does that make sense? So So what does not having rights, or what is not being treated as a moral autonomous agent, what is the symptom that creates in this?
That are very different cases you mentioned, yeah?
Yeah.
In the case of Frederick Douglass, I think it is easy to spell out because Frederick Douglass was a former slave and he was not granted the same kind of legal claims that white people had at that time in the United States. So that was an experience of legal disrespect. So that's a clear experience of legal disrespect.
Right.
It is more difficult in cases where you don't have, let's say,
Law at all.
an established law.
Like the pirates example.
Exactly.
Right.
A law with subjective rights. And in such cases, if you have a community with not with legal rights, they normally have, let's say, other mechanisms to attribute membership. And they probably differentiate between full membership and lower membership. And that would be the kind of experience I'm making in a community that has no positive rights and no legal system, that I'm not taking as having the same membership as others. I'm a lower member. And that would come with the experience, I think, of some kind of disrespect.
Right.
Yeah. And so typical for probably women in certain tribes or women all over history.
Right, but I guess just help me sharpen the language to describe that disrespect, because on one hand, you don't want to describe it simply as I am lesser on others on merits, right? Because that's esteem.
Exactly.
On the other hand, it's not just a lack of self-confidence that I can't assert my own needs, because that's love. So yeah, help me sharpen the language of like what is missing in the person's self-view if they're given secondary rights or not at all.
This person can't take itself as being recognized by others as having autonomy. Autonomy meaning I have a say in how we as a community are organizing stuff. So that kind of membership is not granted to me. Frederick Douglass, yeah, I mean, a human person, a member of, I mean, not a full legal member, but still a member of the US American society, having the feeling to not have a say or the same say as others concerning the organization of societal order. It's the feeling of simply not being taken by all other members of that political community as having equal dignity. And dignity means to have a say.
I see. When you were mentioning the historicity point, how your mind changed, the difference between respect and esteem is a clear example of this, where in pre-modern societies, they're kind of tied together, right? How much respect you are given is tied to the hierarchy, whether you are a feudal lord or a tribal warrior. Are you making just the simple relative claim that, hey, this is modernity, we have these three different types of recognition, we might as well learn how to satisfy it because there's no other alternatives? Or, and this is my suspicion, you want to make the stronger claim that this is actually an improvement upon the old view?
Yes, I would like to make that claim. And so that claim does not yet is in need of stating a kind of permanent moral progress. It is simply depending on how to measure certain, I mean, looking backward, certain progresses in moral terms in society, in human history. The two independent standards of individualization and socialization. And this is not my idea. I think you find it in John Dewey, you find it in Durkheim. Both would say societies are progressing in moral terms, morally progressing, the more they allow the members to become individuals, the more they open the chances for all its members to articulate their own personality, their own wishes, needs, drives. That's one aspect. The other aspect would be there is progression. The further societies are able to develop social networks, forms of social cohesion that are allowing such individualization.
Right. My suspicion is that you don't want to ground this stronger claim, as I describe it, on some kind of Hegelian optimism of history.
No.
What comes later is better. However, your methodology is extremely imminent, right? And we're going to talk about this when we go to Freedom's Right. You are very suspicious of transcendental kind of notions of a super cultural judge, normative standards. And yet the standard you just gave me of individualization, that sounds like quite a modern kind of standard. Like surely the aristocrat would just say, no, I disagree that the greater the individualization, the better the society, right?
Let me argue in the following way. I think the aristocrat would claim for him or herself that he or she is capable of articulating his or her individuality. And it marks, in their own view, their distinction over others, that they are more individually
actualized
than all the rest. So they are claiming something that I then take as a standard for everyone else. So it's not that I take it somewhat completely from outside.
Right.
And I mean, that is one way of justifying that kind of normative standard. Another way would be to claim that growth is what is of interest for us. I mean, to grow, you might even say that's a Nietzschean idea, yeah? Societies have to grow, individuals have to grow, and the only way we can grow is by becoming more individualized, yeah? That's our way of growing. And so if there is growth in nature, and if there is growth in human affairs, then that growth is best articulated in terms of an interdependency between individualization and socialization.
Right. And just to tie it for our audience, when you talk about individualization, part of that is for those different kinds of individualization to be respected by rights, right? And that's the that's the connection, right?
Sure. No, the connection is the decoupling of esteem from legal respect, yeah? So that I'm legally recognized or respected independently from the social esteem or the status or the reputation I have in a society. That can count as a progress because it gives you more free space in articulating your own individuality.
Oh, I see. To try other things of esteem, like you're willing to take a lower esteem to
esteem, and no, legal respect gives you a certain private sphere. It secures and shelters your private sphere. That is when you have subjective rights. Subjective rights give you stability insofar as they allow you to articulate your own private interests.
Right. Which also means that the same standard of more individualization, the better, put it very simply, also means that the different kinds of esteem that society can give out is also another way that this happens. Right. It's not just decoupling respect from esteem. Exactly. It's offering different kinds of esteem. Yeah. And so before we go to esteem, let me ask another question on the historicity of your project. Because what would you say to someone who says, well, we should introduce another kind of recognition? I'm thinking a lot about this actually, which is divine recognition. Okay, recognition from angelic or God. And before you think it's so silly, in Genesis 16, God, the Judeo-Christian God, is described as the God who sees me. In religious traditions, in the saints, the mystics, but also everyday religious people, there's an idea of a relationship with God, right? Being seen with God and seeing yourself as God sees you. So if it really is as historical as you made it to be, what would you say to a proposal to say, no, well, we actually need a fourth kind of divine recognition in our societies as well?
A classical reading of that divine recognition is that was probably the starting point for the experience of respect, yeah? The Christian, but probably also a belief in other religious, monotheistic religions, is that you count in the eyes of God as much as everyone else.
Right, regardless of your esteem.
Yeah, exactly. So you are equal in the eyes of God. And that might have been the first articulation of the idea of unconditional respect. That's then Kant's idea of moral autonomy. Moral autonomy means you are unconditionally respected by everyone else. So that might be in the background, that might be the genesis or genealogy of the idea of unconditional respect, which is now mostly articulated in forms of legal respect.
Of course, the religious would just reject that, right?
Yeah.
They would say it's insufficient, legal respect.
Sure,
right,
sure.
Right.
I mean, I wouldn't exclude that there are people in the world, religious believers, who think their main recognition is not depending on other humans, but it's depending on at least experiencing, feeling to be respected by God. I mean, take the Protestant ethics. The Protestant ethics is about an obligation to work because that testifies to you that you might be saved by God, which means respected by God as deserving to have an afterlife. So there are, first, certainly deep connections between religious sources, religious beliefs, and the way we experiencing recognition, also love, yeah? God is loving me. And there might be today huge religious communities which, or in which you think that there must be not only a fourth type of recognition, but the most basic form of recognition doesn't stem from
humans,
but from some transcendent being, yeah.
Right. So you're fully willing to absorb.
I would. I mean, sure. For descriptive terms, sure. Yeah. I wouldn't build it in the normative framework.
Right, because it's a secular state that you're building. Right. I see. Yeah. So let's move on to the final one, which is esteem, and this is the most obvious one. When people think about recognition, this is what they mean: status, and how much people value your work versus other philosophers versus other professions. And we talked a bit about what kind of pathologies are available, like the stewardess, right, existing outside of herself.
Right.
And I want to challenge what progress looks like in this sphere.
Yeah.
What you said is increasing the types of individuation. And in esteem, that means before we only esteemed, let's say, heterosexual marriage. Now we also esteem homosexual marriage. And that it's the inclusivity of the esteem is the direction of progress. Surely a more classical thinker would say, no, progress means aligning esteem with the good life itself. That you align esteem with virtue and you align shame with vice. That's what a healthy esteem culture looks like. What do you say to that?
I would start by a slight correction of what you said before. I think the way to recognize a gay person is not automatically by esteem, it is by legal recognition. I mean, the gay community was fighting for being legally accepted and receiving the status of a legal person, which means having a say on whom to marry or whom to be with. So it was mainly a legal struggle, I think. Now, the other question is much more complicated, about the way in which social esteem is distributed in a society and how it is experienced. And I think most of my colleagues in political philosophy would make that claim, that the whole question of social esteem should be taken out of theoretical concerns, because that is something that
can't be demanded.
It's going on anyway. There will be always conflict, struggles over how and whom to esteem. And so leave it to the political life. Don't make any claims on that. It's not up to the theoretician. And against that, I am making at least two moves. First, I'm saying, I think we are in need as human beings today of a social esteem, of a certain degree of social esteem. And we see it when we observe people who are experiencing that they count as nothing in a society, that whatever they do, they are not visible, their own endeavors, their own occupations, whatever they do, they are simply not esteemed. That is a specific type of social suffering, I think. And it is a hard one. It is not something you can easily go upon. Then people are saying, that's now the objection to what I just said, you always have solutions for that, because we have all these small circles of countercultures or cultures of respect, compensatory respect. When you are not
underground,
when you are not esteemed as a plumber, then you simply become a member in a soccer team, and there maybe you will be esteemed, or you go to another kind of association. So you have to take care of the way you are experiencing and are getting social esteem, and it's not up to the political philosopher or social philosopher to say something about that. Now, I think if the demand for that would not be so serious, and if I wouldn't see that people are suffering from being not esteemed, not visible at all as a valuable member of a community, I wouldn't care about it. But because I start from the observation,
it's such a core good, right?
It's a central good, as you're saying. It's a basic good for human beings. I have to look not for solutions, definitely not for solutions, but I have to look how that can be organized, and whether how to think about it.
Right. So let me again rephrase the challenge. It seems like the debate over is, what is the standard by which we measure whether esteem is well distributed? Because there's pathological instances where only the tyrant gets esteemed, and we can all say that that is not good, even for the tyrant, right? And so I agree with you that at the very least, the political philosopher should be able to give out standards to judge. So my question for you is, the standard you suggested was an inclusive standard. Before, we didn't esteem X person. Now we do esteem X activity.
Right.
And that's progress. My challenge is, the opposing view is to say healthy esteem is when esteem itself lends to virtue, and that's an independent standard on human nature.
Right.
And then shame goes to vice. So I'll give you a very clear example, where the culture is conflicting right now. There's a whole movement of body positivity. Are you familiar with this? Where fat people, they are not esteemed by culture. Your standard, maybe I'm wrong, would seem to suggest, before we only esteemed fit people, now we include fat people into the esteem, and that's progress. Where someone would say, no, but look at the health of fat people and fit people.
Right.
We want fat people to be ashamed, and we want esteem only to go to fit people, because that's virtue and that's vice.
Right.
So these are the two different, at least architectonically, large models of progress for esteem.
That's a very challenging question, and I have to say, I love to talk about that because it's such a pressing question. There are different sources for social esteem. One very central source for social esteem is directed to the contributions you make as a person to the division of labor. I think that's a basic source for social esteem. There are many other sources for social esteem, most of them being enormously dependent on culture and cultural changes. And I think we as theoreticians can mainly and probably only and exclusively concentrate on that source that can be controlled by a political agency, and that is the division of labor. All the other sources for social esteem, and there are millions, I think, are not controllable by agencies of whatever kind, because they are up to cultural shifts and changes that have a certain, that take a development that is out of our control, not at our disposal.
Right.
Yeah.
So to make it concrete for our audience, nurses, the example you gave, they haven't been esteemed.
Exactly.
And that's something you want to elevate their esteem, because there could be a nurse association that there could be the president or the administration could say, no, we actually have to value these people, right? This is an easy case for the challenge I posed, because presumably being a nurse is a virtue, and presumably, it's inclusive to also include them. But there are these more edge cases, like the body positivity, right?
Yeah, but I think I would react to that by claiming.
Yeah, please.
I don't see. I mean, we can intervene in such debates probably as intellectuals. I'm not even sure whether that makes sense. I think you can't develop any kind of standards that would come with the expectation to be fair standards with regard to that. Yeah. So this might be a question of virtue or vices. It is also a question of personal qualities, personal properties. Beautiful people, beautiful women were seen for a long time as having higher merits or deserving more esteem. Then it became more inclusive. I think this is out of the range of political and social philosophy. What is in range of political philosophy and a legitimate object of political and social philosophy is the form in which the division of labor is distributing social esteem. There we can address a question. We can question the specific organization of that division of labor, and then we can refer to agencies that can change it. But I don't see any way to address or to come up with standards today, not in a traditional society where you had a clear hierarchy of virtues.
Because there are no normative hierarchies of virtue that are easily imminent in this space.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of why reject might be too strong. You go away from the esteem towards virtue, shame towards vice model of progress, towards the inclusivity specifically in the...
Yeah, it's much more related to the division of labor.
Right,
yeah, and it is all about the way in which the division of labor is organized in terms of social esteem.
Right, I see. How do struggles of esteem work? Because struggles of respect, like gay marriage, for example, like you said, you can demand it, right? Because it's a right. Struggles of esteem. How does one win struggles of esteem? Can you demand it from people? Can you ask?
You can appeal to people, and I think we are always appealing. At least in Western Europe, it's the case that the organizations that are representing nurses are articulating a quest for social esteem. They are using the language. They are saying, look, these young or older women are doing extremely important work, but they are not esteemed at all in our societies. So the language is already sitting in the conflicts and the struggles. I mean, you start from observations that your plumber might think that he is a very valuable craftsman, but in comparison to the artist, he counts not really in the culture. And I think he can make then a very legitimate claim that there is something unfair in how we esteem certain professions and occupations. Yeah. And that is, I think, in a not all too visible way, going on day per day, these kind of conflicts over social esteem.
For all these three kinds of recognition,
right.
What is the model by which you think, or the frequency or the breadth by which you think people need them? So how many people need to respect me, to love me, to esteem me, for me to feel that? Is it only a small community, the underground? Is that enough? Is it I build up like a battery, enough of these esteem, and then I can be independent? I can go off like Nietzsche for a while, and then he went crazy, so maybe his battery went out? How do you think about that? Because it's not a constant thing, right? You don't want to say, no, constantly we need everyone to respect.
No. I mean, that's a very difficult question. I think when we start with love, it needs concrete persons. So a small number. Yeah, I mean, the expectation that I'm loved by everyone is crazy. And we know that, and we learned that. So, no, if I have, you can't really demand love. Yeah, sure. Right. That's a kind of recognition that comes freely, and you can't claim that.
Right. It's even harder than esteem. Where esteem, you can still say, look at the nurses, but love is...
Yeah. Love is something very difficult to morally argue for. I think what we can do, if we are in loving relationships and if we are in friendships, we can claim as the friend to be treated according to the principles of love and friendship. That we can claim. But we can't claim that somebody has to become my friend or my lover or whatever, or must take the role of the mother towards me. Now, legal respect is clearly based into a legal community. That is partly and mostly still the nation state. It is expanding, probably. We have human rights. So that's a flexible thing. But the main respect as a legal person I'm receiving from a democratic legal state. Esteem is complicated because I wouldn't say, I mean, this is Rawls. Rawls would say esteem, and he is talking about it, is nothing that can be distributed by an agency. Therefore, it is up to private life. I would say that specific form of social esteem I'm talking about is available to agencies. Right. Agencies can intervene. And with agencies, I mean in that case, political agencies that have the power to intervene probably in the social esteem that is connected to the division of labor. Yeah, they can do a lot to have nurses better paid, to have nurses even being more visible in public life. I mean, the GDR, as problematic it was as a communist state, at least had the huge advantage to make certain kinds of work extremely visible in the public as being of very high value for the society. Yeah, so they were concerned about the social esteem of certain occupations, and I always took that as something of advantage.
Right, and this goes back to the beginning of our conversation. If Rawls treats esteem only as a pat on the back, or this is pretty cool at a cocktail party,
right,
then it becomes very hard to give that kind of out.
Right.
But since you read, for example, payment as one of the primary
As an
modes of it,
instrument
right, then it's very manipulable through
right.
political means.
It's payment. It's also the authority you have in co-determining how you work.
Right.
So it's co-determination. It is how your work is organized, how much skills you have to develop. Yeah, the more skills that you have to develop, I think the better you are with regard to social esteem. So what we should do is we shouldn't allow these kind of stupid mechanical work that is all around. Yeah.
Right.
So there are many ways to intervene in the division of labor and its system of social esteem.
One seductive part about building a social theory off recognition seems to imply that it requires a reciprocity for you to enjoy the recognition. The paradigmatic example is obviously the master-slave dialectic, where the master can't enjoy the slave's recognition because he doesn't recognize the slave as someone who's worthy of giving a master's recognition. But if you actually go down into each of these levels, this kind of reciprocal recognition and its duties are quite weak, right?
Yeah.
Like for me to esteem you as a great philosopher, you don't need to treat me as a great philosopher. You just need to treat me as a good judge of philosophers. Like obviously the mother and the infant are not equals. For moral respect, there's more equality, but this is why you don't use this tool that much in your theory, right? This kind of reciprocal demands that recognition imposes.
That's a complicated conceptual question, yeah. There must be for sure reciprocity. The question is whether there must be equality in status or something like that. And that is depending on this sphere of recognition we are talking about. I mean, in case of legal respect, there must be not only reciprocity,
but equality, right?
And equality, yeah. So you have certain obligations towards me as a legal person. I have certain claims towards you, and so on and so on. That is equality, reciprocal equality. Now the question is with regard to love. The clear exception there is
romantic love, right?
Yeah, exactly. If we speak of romantic love, then we have both equality and reciprocity, I think. In the case of the mother-child or the caregiver, we don't have. So it depends a little bit on the individual cases, on the social cases we have in view.
Right, but that alone, my point, is not strong enough to build the kind of egalitarian.
No, right. But it is, the egalitarian viewpoint is inbuilt, I think, in the whole idea of legal respect. Right. That's a strong egalitarian idea.
Right. This is the last question I want to ask you about recognition before we move on to freedom's right, which is your work always approaches political philosophy in the lens of goodness, on what is good. The other lens to approach it, and maybe the dominant thinker here is Machiavelli, is the lens of power.
Right.
What will make my society and state reproduce and be competitive with other societies? And so my question for you is whether pathology might be even necessary to produce a powerful society. And I'll give you an example of what I mean. So I grew up partially between Canada and America. And Canada, I think, it fits a lot more well in your healthy view of respect, of esteem. You don't have to be a billionaire there to be esteemed. You get healthcare, which is a kind of a form of recognition, respect, right? Legal respect. But the fact that you get let's call it a participation trophy for being a human in Canada makes everyone just a bit more chilled out and a bit more lazy and a bit more, they don't have this thirst for achievement to prove themselves. Whereas in America, all of her industries, the world's top talent comes here in tech, in academia, in art, in media, kind of because of that frenzied energy. And it's something like precisely because these species of recognition are such key goods, when you rob people of them, you can inflame people's motivational nexus.
Right.
And you see this in Florence, in the Renaissance, right? You see this Schelling. Holderlin said, "I want to be Schelling or nothing." That's pathology, right? It's clearly, you can't, that represents a society that doesn't reward its artists unless they become the best. Is there a power to pathology? Is there a legitimate power to pathology?
I would hesitate to call it a pathology. There are different forms in which societies can organize in a meaningful way competition.
Right.
And so academic competition is something, I think, that is not only necessary but unavoidable.
Mm-hmm.
In the same way in sports. I mean, we have already organized sports in ways of competition. And we take it as being a very good instrument to satisfy our need for standing completely out. I mean, this has nothing to do with a fair distribution of social esteem. These are ways to search for special esteem, yeah, to be highly esteemed. And I think it belongs to a good enough society to have fantasy in creating fields of competition that do not hurt. Yeah, I mean, that's very important, because there are fields of competition where it hurts when you are lost, when you lose. Right. But I think sports, dance, whatever, we have so many fields where we think competition is something fruitful and it brings out the best in human beings. And so I don't mind at all to have that as a compensatory mechanisms in society to bring out the best, to stimulate our amour propre in Rousseau's sense. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad you brought up Rousseau, because the quote I was going to read you is one of my favorites in the second discourse. It is to this ardor to be talked about, to this frenzy to achieve distinction, which almost always keeps us outside ourselves, this is the stewardess case, that we owe what is best and what is worst among men. Our virtues and our vices, our sciences and our errors, our conquerors and our philosophers, that is to say, a multitude of bad things for a small number of good things, yeah. Right? And I love that. But I want to push you even a bit more, Axel, which is, I'm not just talking about using esteem as a market, so to speak. I'm talking about systematic disrespect, maybe even in the legal sphere, that makes people yearn for esteem all the more. And I'll give you another example. Nietzsche talks about his infamous pathos of distance, and why he says for every high culture, slavery is in some sense or other needed.
Right.
He's not talking about material, that we need slaves so that the aristocrats can do philosophy. He's saying it's the disgust that the great man, the higher man, sees of the plebeians.
Right,
that is what motivates his climb upwards. Do you see that as a?
Now, I have to tell you, I think that's a slightly aristocratic worldview, and I don't share it. I mean, as I said before, I think there are ways of, or there are forms of competition that are extremely good with regard to what you would call bringing about certain virtues. Rousseau's point, yeah? I mean, the amour propre, when it's good organized, might bring about the best in human beings. But what I wouldn't like as a political philosopher, and probably as a human being, are forms of competition or of making people suffer, of which I believe, as being the superior person, that it is fruitful for beings to suffer. I think that's a wrong way to look at the organization of societies. Yeah.
Right.
So, and it's very often misguided. Sometimes you think that in a dictatorship, the art and literature is even better because people are suffering and it brings the best out of them. And I don't take that.
Hold on. When you say you don't take that, do you disagree descriptively with Nietzsche that the pathos of distance is needed for greatness? Or do you say, even if I agree with you descriptively, I disagree with you normatively, that that's the right thing to do?
No, it's good that you make the difference. Both, I think. I don't agree descriptively. James Joyce was not growing up in a dictatorship, and Picasso neither. Picasso was suffering Franquism and dictatorship. But look at his life. he lived a wonderful free life, yeah.
Right.
And he created. We can talk about the quality of Picasso's work, but he created great art. And so I don't buy that descriptively, and especially not normatively.
I see.
Yeah.
So what I take to be your early masterpiece is Struggle for Recognition, and that's what we talked about. And your later masterpiece is Freedom's Right, right? And here you're trying to think about the institutional conditions that actualize and satisfy these three kinds of recognition. Here's my first question for you, which is, in Freedom's Right, you lay out three normative standards of freedom: legal freedom, negative freedom, reflexive freedom, and social freedom. Why not just stick with the three forms of recognition you developed in Struggle for Recognition to evaluate institutions if recognition is already the grammar of moral conflict? What does, and they're not one-to-one, right? What does reframing it in the language of freedom give you?
Yeah, it's a good question. First, I have to say I wrote this book in the spirit of trying to do something pompous, if you want so, namely to try to see whether one can actualize the spirit of Hegel's philosophy of right. So in Hegel's philosophy of right, you have a lot of institutional forms of mutual recognition, but he is articulating these forms of mutual recognition in terms of freedom. And I like that move. Yeah? I like the idea that one way of speaking about the outcome of recognition would be to say it increases our freedom. Yeah? And so you easily can say that love gives me a specific type of freedom. Self-trust is a form of freedom. And so I thought it's better if you start to work upon the principles of a democratic society, what that really means. It's probably better to start in terms of freedom, how freedom should be organized in such a society, and then showing indirectly that those freedoms, if they are well understood, are all in need of certain forms of recognition. So recognition came in through the back door. It is not absent, but it is living another life there.
Right. Here's another reason perhaps why you changed to the language of freedom. I'll give you a quote. As if by magical attraction, all modern ethical ideals have been placed under the spell of freedom. Sometimes they infuse this idea with greater depth or add new accents, but they never manage to posit an independent, standalone alternative. It is no longer clear what it would even mean to demand a just social order without simultaneously calling for individual self-determination. You have to transform to the language of freedom because of your imminent commitments.
That's right.
Look, when you look at modernity, all these movements, they're all framed in freedom. So let me tell you what you actually want in freedom. But let me challenge you on this premise. Are all the different theocratic movements in the world, are they framed in freedom? I'm thinking about obviously the Islamic theocracies, but also Christian integralism, like a Christian nation state. They don't frame it. These modern movements don't frame it in
How would
freedom.
you say they frame it? Superficially, you could say they are claiming religious freedom. But that's, I agree, that's not coming to the point, what they're really about.
They would say we are ordering this not according to our judgments and our self-autonomy, but in God's view of the world. We are ordering society in the way that God wants us. Why, for example, would they potentially ban homosexuality? It's not because we don't judge it to be good. It's because XYZ book told us not to do it, right?
Would they then conclude that the states they are trying to establish, take the Taliban, they are repressing freedom? No. How would they justify the political regime they try to establish? They would claim that this is the way in which freedom is best organized.
Right.
Yeah?
Freedom comes from submission.
Yeah.
Right, something like that.
Yeah.
Right. True freedom comes from submission.
Yeah, so my idea was, but I got a lot of criticism for that there is no way you can articulate meaningful justification for any kind of political societal order today without making one or the other reference to the principle of freedom. And I still believe there is something in that. Yeah.
Right.
And all the social movements. I mean, even I have to say, I always have doubts with regard to the ecological movement, whether you can really say this is in terms or in the name of
climate action.
Right. Climate action. But I think if you bring it down, they would say we only can live a free life, the life that is promised to us by modern principles, if we can live in a safe surrounding environment, and it needs the resistance against the destruction of nature, because we want to live independent from that fear.
Right, I see. So let's examine each of these spheres of freedom. And negative legal freedom is the easiest to understand. It's a Hobbesian kind of, the lack of external impediments. And my question for you is, given your recognitive view of human nature, and when we were reading your books together almost a decade ago, the passage that really stuck with me was Hume on the violin strings.
Right.
How humans are like violin strings, and if you flick one, it naturally, recognition, imitation, it transfers to the other. Right. If that truly is the view of human nature, how do you make sense of Hobbesian rights, in the sense that what even is external versus internal if we are these violin strings, and why does this kind of freedom even matter?
I would avoid to use Hobbes here as the source. I mean, Hegel's understanding of privacy as a space of your own that has to be protected by legal rights is a much better way to understand what it is about, that privacy that is secured by certain subjective rights, because that privacy might be understood, that private realm might be understood as the room you need in order to find out what your interests are, who you might become. And so it's a basic requirement for becoming even a member within a society. But one shouldn't think of these different forms of freedom as being meant as a sequence. They are meant to coexist, and if they are meant to coexist, like I think in Hegel's philosophy of right, then it becomes clear that it needs privacy, sheltered privacy, secured privacy, in order to be with yourself, finding out who you are.
But you're never with yourself in your view of human nature, right? The violin strings, you're always recognitively, imitatively. We can't examine the individual. To your point, interdivisiduality precedes cognition, right? So what does that even mean?
That sits deep, yeah, sure. And when I'm talking about a private space, then I don't mean that my thoughts I have there are completely independent from others. No, they are socially constituted. And when I'm thinking with myself, I speak to myself, but I speak probably in the language of the society to myself. So it's a dialogue I have with myself, which is more or less probably a dialogue between me and society. But take Virginia Woolf's idea about a room for oneself. It is the idea that to be a person needs possibilities of withdrawal from others, who then can't easily influence you, can't press their opinion on you. So you need that kind of private realm and private room for finding out who you want to be in independence from others. It supposes, to use that private realm, it supposes what I called before with reference to Winnicott, the capacity to be alone with yourself. Yeah. So
Self-love, kind of
self-love,
right?
yeah.
But this is also, so this is where the recognition freedom mapping becomes murky, because this is almost part of self-love, but there's also self-respect here, because it's legal guarantees or some of this.
Yeah, right. It needs legal guarantees. It needs the guarantees of subjective rights that allows you privacy to make use of your self-love or your capacity to be alone with yourself.
Right.
Yeah.
And if these spheres are supposed to coexist, and a good example here is that abstract right, what gets justified as private property, right? You have a private sphere where you can kind of just do your will, like your arbitrary will.
Right.
Obviously, private property is going to conflict with other kinds of freedom, namely social freedom.
Right.
When there are conflicts in spheres, does social freedom always just trump the other spheres, or how do conflicts between these kind of freedoms get settled?
That's a good question, yeah. No, I mean, first the one question is social freedom coming in forms of special rights, so that there is one right competing with another? So I think certain forms of social freedom are coming with rights, social rights, political rights, but they are not sufficiently filled by spelling them out only in terms of rights. So there might be conflicts, yes. I think that I'm not using the notion of private rights. Subjective rights as guaranteeing a sphere of privacy are a central precondition for all the other forms. I would go so far. I mean, so I wouldn't say that there are overriding or triumphant or trumps that could be enacted by the other forms of social freedom.
But hold on. But if we were to say private property can't be overridden by the others, even in America, your private property can be taken away. It can be wealth taxed.
Yeah, sure. That's a question of how we define private property.
Right.
Yeah. And I never would say private property is meant to be also private property on the forces of production.
Right.
It is a specific view on private property as a basic form of legal respect. And that private property is meant roughly in the following sense. I think a person that has no space available in which nobody else is allowed to intervene might suffer from suffer not only from the absence of privacy, but might suffer from a simple capacity not to know who you are in difference to all others.
Bildung, the lack of Bildung.
Yeah. So therefore, the right to property, in my own understanding, sometimes I think Hegel would do the same thing, is it's a right on a minimal property that everyone should have, namely that kind and type of property that is necessary for, Hegel would say, to objectify you in certain stuff that nobody else has a right to intervene into, something like that.
Right. But there are forms of subjective rights that I think that needs to be violated in some sense.
Yeah, sure.
And the clearest example is like martial law, right?
Yeah.
Like if you're in war, then you probably don't have, you don't want to give people. So yeah, I'm just challenging you a bit on the subjective rights, legal rights. There's always a protected sphere that can't be overridden.
Yeah, that comes with something else that is probably not sufficiently articulated in the book. I think the different spheres bring about their own forms of property. So family that's already Hegel, has its own form of property. Now the big question is with regard to what is called the economy or the market system. It seems to come with a specific own form of property, namely private property over means of production, over forces of production. I think I would reclaim that, and I would think that even in Hegel you find certain roots allowing to say something else. Namely, there must probably be certain forms of communal property, collective property, in order to well functioning. I mean, so that if you want to have social freedom in the economic sphere, it needs a limitation of private property, and it needs an expansion of collective property.
Right.
Yeah, and then you go over to the political society, the political body, and that again is in need of specific forms of properties. Yeah,
Right.
If you want to have a functioning representative democratic system, it needs probably parties. They need their own forms of properties, and so on and so on.
War, you need property for
sure,
war, right?
Sure.
So to finish up our discussion on this legal property, what I found fascinating is how you describe pathology. One pathology here is to misinterpret what that private space is for.
Right.
And maybe this is the like libertarian kind of
Right,
mistake,
right,
which is like people mistake the negative space as this is the point of political life, is to tend to my own garden.
Right.
Instead of using it as a resting place before going into society.
Right.
What are the causes of that pathology, and how can that be resolved?
You misunderstand what these freedoms are for. And in case of legal rights, or in case of that right, you tend to believe that all your activities should be best understood in terms of legally mediated activities. So if you start a friendship, you think, being in that pathology, it would be good we would have a contract about our friendship. Yeah. So as you think the best way to guarantee a safe romantic love is to enter a marriage contract. So, or if you then dissolve, or if you are losing that romantic love relationship, you think it needs a divorce, a legal procedure. So it's the over-legalization of our attitudes toward society and our interactions in society that brings about that pathology. It's especially highly developed in the United States, I have to say, because you think everything is articulated in terms of legal harms.
Right.
And sometimes I think this is getting a little bit absurd. It means first you have an overproduction of lawyers, I think. You have an overproduction of legal cases. You have an overproduction of security thinking in universities, so that they have to secure themselves against legal claims permanently. So I think the American culture could be a culture that indicates what it means, what that pathology means.
But why? Like, what causes that?
An incapacity to have other forms of cooperation and coordination than the law.
I see.
Yeah?
The lack of the other spheres, or
right. I mean,
right.
I mean, we could negotiate, we could have conversations, we could have, oral. There are oral forms of coordinating things.
Yeah. The second kind of freedom is moral freedom.
Right.
How is moral freedom different from legal freedom, and how can it be pathologized? Yeah.
Yeah, we talked about that distinction between legal and moral respect before. So here I'm stretching that out, and I'm saying there is legal respect that is best exemplified in subjective rights, and there is moral respect that is. It's hard to say whether it's really institutionalized. I don't think that moral freedom can be institutionalized. It can be institutionalized, if at all, in a very soft way, namely by making a culture be aware that everyone deserves to be morally respected. It's coming via culture, not via institutions, not via
Laws or
laws,
right.
stable institutions. Yeah, I mean, sure, you can have schools organized in such a way that they start from recognizing the moral autonomy of the pupils or whatever, but it's much more difficult to have that institutionalized. So it comes more in form of a culture that is sensitive enough to recognize the moral autonomy of all members. And the pathology of it is the famous Hegelian pathology of morality, namely when you think you have to organize your own life in such a way that you always take the moral point of view without trusting your sometimes personal affinities and personal preferences.
Right. So the extreme case, I can't remember what philosopher said this, but if legal freedom is to be able to act on your arbitrary whim, moral freedom is to act on that which you can rationally agree with, right? It's not acting according to a will of some kind.
Acting on what you think acting on maxims of which you think everyone could agree.
Right, the Kantian phrase. And the pathology there is kind of like the legal one, where it's like you see a kid drowning, and instead of immediately saving them, you say, "Well, but is this category? Is that it?"
See,
right?
the famous Bernard Williams case. Yeah, it is you stand on a ship that is sinking, and many people are drowning, and you ask yourself whether you allow yourself to rescue your own wife. Right. Williams saying that's one thought too much. Yeah, I mean that is not a necessary thought. You are free to rescue your wife, right. And so it would be an over moralization in that sense to ask yourself that Kantian question: am I allowed to rescue my wife when it might be unfair to all the others who are also in danger of drowning?
And just like how legal pathology comes from an overly legalized culture that lacks other spheres, let's say if I only grew up with activists around, right. My parents were activists, that might induce a moral pathology, right? Where you're always asked, like, well, can I do this?
Right,
can I do
right,
that?
Right. So I think a pathology consists mainly in taking one sphere of freedom as being the only one, the exclusive one. And when you don't have trust that what is available to us and where we live in is offering very different forms of freedom. Yeah, and when I'm sticking myself and relying only on one of these different spheres of freedom, I think I get it wrong, and there might be then the danger of a certain, whether you would call it pathology. Yeah, there are dangers of pathology.
But unlike legal freedom, certainly moral freedom must be superseded at least sometimes by social freedom, right? In the case where someone can't see the reason for why a just institution has to exist, Rousseau's infamous phrase, forced to be free.
Right.
So do you permit that kind of activity where
I wouldn't speak of forced. I wouldn't speak of has to learn too, yeah, has to be educated such that he or she can experience the value of the other spheres of freedom. Yeah. So I wouldn't speak of enforcement, but I would speak of the right kinds of education, and Rousseau also spoke about education. And
right, but given that we don't live in a perfect world, let's take the restrictions on private property,
right.
And you just have someone he or she just says, no, I don't accept. All taxation is a theft, right? This is something you hear.
Right.
And to such a person, surely you wouldn't say,
I see.
Well, then we have to respect their moral freedom.
No, that's enforcement.
Right, that's enforcement.
No. Limitations but that is mainly, I think, with regard to legal rights. Limitations are coming from higher order concerns for the other spheres of freedom to flourish. Yeah?
Right.
So that in order you have a flourishing economy, namely an economy that is satisfying the conditions of social freedom, it needs high limitations on private property on the forces of production. Sure. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Let's talk about the last sphere of
Right.
freedom, social freedom, and help me understand how it's not just the institutions that teach and actualize legal and moral freedom. I get the sense that you want to suggest it's more than just actualizing the first
Right,
kinds of
right,
freedom, right?
right,
So,
right.
so help me understand what that consists in. Yeah.
It consists, I mean, the first two freedoms are freedoms that we can enjoy by ourselves and in that sense alone, even when they are constituted by forms of recognition. Yeah, I mean, in order to enjoy your legal privacy, your legally guaranteed privacy, it needs a whole community of persons that accept or constitute that legal sphere. But then you are allowed to be with yourself, and you can enjoy that freedom by yourself. Social freedoms you cannot enjoy by yourself. It needs the interaction with others, and it needs the communicative relation to others to enjoy those freedoms. Yeah, and so it needs communication to live something like romantic relationships. It needs communicative relationships to be part of the division of labor in the economy, and it needs definitely communication if you want to enjoy political freedom. Yeah, I mean, you might have the wrong understanding of political freedom, believing that it is the exercise of political freedom if you go next Tuesday to the elections in New York, you draw your ballot, or how you call it. But that's not exactly what we mean with political freedom. With political freedom, we mean this is, I mean, most of classical republicanism. The political freedom is Hannah Arendt. It is the existence in the public sphere where you debate with others and in front of others how to organize your political community. So political freedom you can only exercise with others. And the same is true for all the other social freedoms. They are in need of direct forms of social recognition, of mutual recognition, and they can be enjoyed only with others. And they are depending on institutions that allow these communications.
Right. So to summarize for our audience, social freedom has three main realms. The first one is personal relationships, like familial relationships, romantic relationship, friendship. Then we have the market, the second realm, and the third one is the political, like the political sphere, not just voting, but communication and debate. Help someone who's still confused understand why these are described as freedoms. Especially, maybe we can take the most difficult case, which is like the friendship case. Like, why is my relationship with a dear friend, why should I primarily conceive that in the language of freedom? Yeah.
Because, yeah, it's a good question. To give a phenomenological description, I would say that I feel in a very specific way and unique way free when I'm in an engagement with a friend. I have the feeling, phenomenologically, that I can be who I am with somebody else. I can find out who I am with somebody else, and friendship is very often about exactly that, yeah? To help the other to find out who you are. So that is, in my view, even descriptively, the experience of a certain type of freedom. I mean, that is what I try to say in that chapter. It is a very good point you are making, because I got that question quite often, whether it is justified to speak definitely valuable experiences of friendship in terms of a specific form of freedom. But I think the freedom there consists in being able to take the other as being the one who allows you to be authentic.
Yeah.
And that might be a very specific form.
Through recognition, through the kind of the esteem and the love. Here's, I think I got this from Fred Neuhauser, a colleague of yours, a teacher and friend of mine as well. Here's how I would defend the thesis, which is that freedom, commonly people would see this as not being determined by anything alien. I think most people would agree with that, not being determined.
Right.
So it's to exist, to be at home in the world. It's to, however, as finite beings, we are always determined by other people, by other things in the environment. And so freedom is not just a negative. It is about making the world you inhabit, whether it's the social or the material world, feel at home, that you can see within it principles that reflect what you agree with. This is the moral point.
Yeah.
And therefore, all of these forms of institutions and things in the world are freedom because they help you be determined by something that's not alien. How's that?
Yeah, no, completely right. You might even say these social freedoms are the experience that you are in a communication with others that enhance your own self-realization. Yeah, they are not any longer a limit to your self-realization, but they are allowing you self-realization. So in that sense, they're allowing you to be at home in that specific relationship, whatever that is. It might be politics or whatever, but the experience that the other is not longer a limit to the realization of my freedom, but he or she is somebody wanting my freedom. That's probably the point. Yeah, I mean, that another wants me to realize myself.
Right.
That is a very specific experience. And I think it would be fantastic if all the three spheres I'm talking about, personal relationships, even economy, and the political sphere, could be institutionalized in such a form that I can get the feeling that the others in that sphere want me to become who I am. Self-realization. It would mean, with regard to society, to economy, that I would experience my entering in the economic sphere as the entering of a sphere where others, namely those engaged in the division of labor, want me to bring out the best of me by taking up a certain occupation. If that's possible, then we would have full realization of social freedom within the economic sphere.
Right. And this goes back to one of the things we brought up early on in love, how true independence is actually forming the right kinds of dependency, right?
Sure.
And this also explains why some people might be confused when they hear freedom through the market, because they might think it's the kind of negative freedom that you associate.
No, exactly.
But it's actually freedom in developing your capacities, right? Which is why I believe you're against UBI and things like that, because it's paternalistic.
Yeah, sure. No, I'm actually trying to argue in favor of something like market socialism. So not only highly regulated markets, but markets, the actor or the participants of which are more collective actors than individuals. And to be a collective actor on a market, it needs collective property. So I think one should think differently on markets.
Yeah. We're going to finish our interview with two methodological questions. The first one is, You describe freedom's right as a pompous, in your own words, attempt at essentially rewriting the philosophy of right for the 21st century. Are you also affirming in some sense that the current state we have now is an end in history, if not in the actual form of it, for the market is probably the furthest example you'd think, but in its normative ideals, that we're in some kind of end of history, that the current welfare state we're in, yeah?
I have to say, I wrote this book with more optimism than I have now. Yeah, I mean, when I was writing it, I didn't expect that things could go so deeply wrong as they are going today. Yeah, I mean, we have democracy under attack almost everywhere, and mainly by right-wing movements, by radical right-wing movements. We have it in the United States, we have it in Europe, almost in all countries. So I probably would have been a little bit more cautious. I wrote this book with the expectation this is going on. Yeah? It is we are living in a process of further democratization. Now I have to be more cautious there. I have a tendency to say we are not at the end of history at all with regard to how we best institutionalize these different forms of freedom. I think we can and we have to make a lot of learning there, to find better ways to organize these different forms of freedom. I tend to believe, and I tend to understand Hegel saying that, but I'm not sure, that with regard to normative revolutions, we are probably not at, you're almost at the end. Because I can't think of a better idea to organize societal life than under the principle of freedom. It will be an ongoing, never-ending debate how best to understand freedom. And it will be an ongoing debate, never-ending, about how to institutionalize different forms of freedom better. But I can't imagine that a better principle will ever show up.
Right. Final question. In the entire basket of human goods, what is recognition's position? It's certainly not exhaustive, right? Even though it's the thing that you focus on the most. Does it have lexical priority for other goods? Is it necessary for a good life? How do you think about that, and why have you disproportionately focused on this one idea?
It's a good question. It depends a little bit how you define recognition. If you have that kind of complex understanding of it that I have, that sounds now again relatively pompous, but I would lean to claim it's the highest good. I mean,
And the full good.
No, there are extra goods that can't be articulated in terms of recognition.
Like pleasure, right?
Health, yeah. I mean, there are many other goods. But if you take the Nicomachean Ethics, a lot of it is about to find the right way of company with others that indicates eudaimonia, not the philosopher, but the political citizen and the one who is searching for friendship. He is, or she is, normally he, in case of Aristotle, he tries to find the right kinds of communicative relationships. And these are relationships of mutual recognition, if you look more carefully. So I think if you have a complex enough understanding of what recognition entails, and in what different forms it comes, you might say it is probably the highest good.
Right. Although even Smith, in his theory of moral sentiments, says we want not just to be sympathized, but sympathizable.
Yeah.
Right. And so And this goes back to my question of,
Yeah, but
isn't there a standard of the good life? Like
Yeah.
we want to be recognized as good and to be good, right? Like,
Yeah, but I mean, that depends a lot on how you understand the different spheres of recognition. I don't want to be esteemed for some competences I don't believe are justifiably recognized.
right.
I want to be recognized in the right way, and I want to deserve recognition or esteem. And I think I even want that I deserve the love I'm getting. So Smith had a completely good point on that we expect not simply to be esteemed, but we expect to deserve esteem. So that is inbuilt, I think, in the notion of recognition. And therefore, one might say, but one has to be cautious, it's something like an indication of the highest good.
I see. Well, thank you, Professor Honneth, for taking the time.
Yeah, it's a good last sentence. Yeah. Thank you.
Thanks for watching my interview. If you want to go even deeper into these ideas, then join my email list at jonathanb.com. You'll not only get full-length episodes, but also transcripts, book notes, and invitations to future lectures. Now, if you like this interview, be sure to check out my other interview with Fred Neuhauser on Rousseau that covers many similar themes around recognition. You can find links to that episode and everything else we discuss in the description and on my website, jonathanb.com. Thank you.